Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Maurice Brown Comedy Show on Bog Radio. We got a great show in store for you this morning, folks. I'm going to tell you that right now. We have a special guest to the show that is the middle child of a preacher's family. Yep, you guessed it. She's a comedian. She's also a storyteller through the written and spoken word, visual art, and video editing, all intertwined with the realities of life. She got her own dry bar comedy special a couple of years ago. Please check that out. Hilarious, absolutely hilarious. And a friend to the Maurice Brown Comedy Show. She also has a book out now called Kind of Funny. But I can tell you, she's more than kind of funny. She's really funny. Please welcome JJ Barrows Newton. What's up, JJ?
Hey, Maurice. Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you on the show. And, it's a couple of years ago, I had you on an Instagram deal I was doing. And I've gotten beyond that. And we're on bogradio.fm. We're also on radioqdx.com out of Lucama, North Carolina, and KCHF-TV out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was talking about your book, Kind of Funny. And I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit and what brought this on and also how our listeners can get a copy.
Yeah. So Kind of Funny. It's stories by a full-time comedian with 4 part-time jobs. That's kind of what it took for me to be a full-time comedian for a while. Essentially, it's just a collection of stories. So you can pick them up and read, 1 or 2 at random, or if you want, you can read all the way through. But they're just from different seasons of life. And I very intentionally called it Kind of Funny, in part because sometimes I feel more like that feels more accurate to me. Sometimes I feel more like I'm kind of funny as opposed to I'm a professional comedian.
Okay.
But also just because I think, and I'm sure a lot of comedians can attest to this, I'm not always funny. Like the reality is I'm not always who people see on stage or who people see online. Yes, that is very much me and that's a part of me, but it's not all the sides of me. And so I very much wanted to have something that was more layered because we all are, as people. Yeah. And I wanted it to be kind of funny. I wanted it to be kind of deep. There's some stories that are kind of awkward. There's some stories that are kind of spiritual. So I wanted there very intentionally to be a little bit of everything because I very much have never felt like I fit into a box or a job description of, comedian or artist or even like writer. Like all of those are parts of me, but they're not fully just the full experience of who I am. And so for me, it was kind of revealing some other sides to me that people might not see online or on stage, which in some ways felt very vulnerable, but but it was also really a good experience for me to kind of to put it all out there and just be like, this is who I really am, as opposed to kind of build up a persona that people have an expectation for me to live up to and that I wouldn't be able to fulfill as a human, essentially. So yeah, it's kind of a mix of all the things. And I feel like I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a little bit of something in there for everybody in all the different seasons of life that there are.
I like what you said about not being funny all the time, because when people think of comedians, they think we're always, the life of the party. Haha, we're just one joke after another. And, it's just not like that. I mean, the reality is we're like everybody else, My wife even says, I thought you're a comedian. Well, I'm not going to laugh my way through. Anyway, that's what people think. And it's not that way. We go through things. Life is what it is, just like everybody else. What we've done is we've figured out how to turn experiences that are not so cool into laughter.
Yes.
And, that's what we're good at.
Right.
And so I love that. I love that explanation that you gave there, JJ. I love it.
Thank you.
How can the listeners here that are on Bog Radio here get a copy of Kind of Funny?
Yes, you can head to Amazon.com, as they say on the webs, Amazon, and just type in Kind of Funny and it should pop right up, or Kind of Funny JJ, and you should be able to find it there.
I love it. And I was telling you that I was watching your special, and it's really very good. You did this a few years ago in
Yeah.
Provo, Utah. Uh,
Yep.
Tell us about that experience and what that was like.
Yeah, it was yeah, at the time it was overwhelming. I mean, in a good way. It was such a new experience to me to film a comedy production. Never done anything like it before. I mean, I don't even think I was a full 3 years into doing comedy yet. And so I had mostly just done live shows up to that point. And so to
Okay.
actually go to a full production, where they're doing a live taping and there's, things you have to pay attention to. And it just, there's the live audience that you absolutely like have to cater to because they're the ones that are going to be hopefully laughing in the special.
Absolutely.
If you
Absolutely.
watch a comedy special, half of what makes it good is the sound of people laughing.
Yes. Absolutely.
I mean, someone can tell a really funny joke, but if you don't hear laughter after the joke, you almost question, wait, was it funny? so,
Yeah.
so you want to make sure you're engaging the live audience, but you also have to be aware of the cameras and the fact that there is going to be this quote invisible audience watching at a later date. And you have to be kind of aware of that. And Dry Bar was a little bit different because there was a lot of rules around kind of what you could and couldn't do, couldn't say,
Hmm.
which wasn't too big of an issue for me. But there were enough. It was enough of a restriction that it made me be like hyper aware. I don't want to say anything wrong or do anything wrong. So there's a lot of stuff going on, in your head. On top of which you're trying to make sure you are reciting your material that you've memorized. You're paying attention to who responded in what way in the audience. And then you've got, the cameras coming in at different angles and you got the clock on the wall, like lighting at you for your time limit. So it was so much kind of going on at once
Yeah.
that it was a lot, but it was super fun to get to experience and get to do. And I did write a little bit about it, just about how different it was um, in my book, kind of working with that group. But they were super nice. I mean, it couldn't have been a nicer group of people there at Dry Bar. But yeah, it was fun. It was definitely different, but it was fun. And I think I still plan to do another special at some point, just my own special. But it's funny, I can look back and watch that one now and I'm like, wow, my adrenaline was so high. Like I could see, other people might not be able to tell, but I know myself. And so I watch it and I'm like, my nerves, man, and when I get nervous or my adrenaline's high and on stage, my accent comes out real thick, like not even on purpose, but so I'm originally from South Carolina and I've lived all over. I mean, Chicago, Portland, Oregon, San Diego, California. And I think over the years, my accent has just gotten muddled or, whatever. But when I get like too tired or too excited or a little angry, any heightened state of emotion, my accent comes out real thick. And so on stage, a lot of times my adrenaline is so high that I'm like, hey y'all, how y'all doing? And it's almost like, whoa, who is that?
Well,
like,
I think that, most people feel like when they're watching us that we're totally under control and composed.
yeah,
And if people have no idea what we're feeling.
totally.
You know what I mean? It's like, but we practice so much and we know our routine so well, we do come off very composed, but the reality is we're feeling all kind of crazy things. You did an
Totally.
awesome job
Thank
on
you.
this Dry Bar. I want for our audience, I want to play a little snippet of about a minute or two of your Dry Bar comedy special that you did about 2-3 years ago in Provo, Utah. Ladies and gentlemen, take a listen to J.J. Barrows Newton in action.
I've always been a little bit of a late learner. It comes with the territory. I'm originally from South Carolina. That deserves, yeah, thank you. That deserves a mild response. It's fine. When I was growing up, South Carolina was 49th in education. Yeah, we might have upgraded to 50th by now. I haven't checked the stats. Mostly because I don't know how. I'm just saying. Like, for example, I found out very late in life, like very late, that Alaska and Hawaii were not next to each other. Down here where they appeared to be at the bottom of the map. Yeah, nobody clarified that the map ran out of space and someone just slapped them down there. I thought that's where they lived. I went my merry little way, just dumb as a clam. Till 7 years ago, I was hired by Alaska Airlines. Yeah, I was told I was going to be stationed in Anchorage, Alaska. And I was so excited because I'd always wanted to go to Hawaii. Yeah, I was like, what island do you think we'll be close to? Turns out none of them. Spoiler alert for any other Carolinians in the room. I called my mom and I was like, Mom, I got the job. And apparently our maps are no good because Alaska and Hawaii are not off the coast of California. Yeah, she was like, did I drop you? Bless your heart. Some of y'all know, that's another thing y'all need to know about the South. If anybody from the South ever says to you, bless your heart, they are not being nice to you.
That's very true, JJ. They're not being very nice to you. I'm from North Carolina, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're not being nice.
Sometimes some Southern ladies are like, well, honey, I mean it when I say it. I'm being nice. And I'm like, well, that's fair. It can be a nice sentiment sometimes. It's all about how you say it and when you say it. Like, well, I have a more recent example of a woman in Georgia who came up to me and she was like, honey, I've been following you for years on Facebook. This is my first time seeing you live. And I got to say, you look mighty different in person. And I just kind of assumed that was a compliment for some reason. Uh-huh. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And she goes, yeah, you're very photogenic. Bless your heart. And I was like,
oh boy. Here we go.
That lady just called me ugly.
You know what? I think Southerners are probably the wittiest people in the nation.
Yeah, they're great. I pick on them, but I love them because I'm one of them.
Wow. So we were talking before we came on live about COVID-19, and all of us as comedians, we had to sit down. We just could not perform, which was a very difficult time. How did you, during this 2-year period around about, deal with that period of not being able to perform?
You know, at first, I enjoyed it. It felt like a break that everybody had to take. Right. You know, and so it didn't feel like I was sitting out and being lazy while everyone else was working. It felt like a little bit of like we can all take a break. I think leading up to maybe I had wanted somewhat of a break, but I didn't feel like I had earned it yet. It didn't. So even if I were to take a break, I would have felt restless because I would have felt like I have to be doing something or being out there or working or hustling and so I think when COVID hit, it was just this collective pause.
Yeah.
And so at first I just really leaned into that and I enjoyed it and I liked it. But then as time went on, and especially as you're watching people figure out how to get creative during that time and how to keep showing up, you know, you start to get restless and itchy to do something, you know, to get back out there. And so then that's when it got hard, was when I felt like I was ready, you know, to get back out there, but there was nothing really like available for me to do. And I think it was hard for me as a quote unknown, as I've been called from time to time in my career from various people, you know, because I'm not a name like Jim Gaffigan or Jerry Seinfeld or whatever. You know, people who were kind of already had these big platforms, well, they were very easily still getting gigs and doing jobs and selling tickets and all the things. But, you know, when people don't really know who you are, especially post COVID, when, stuff went to half capacity and, they're splitting up, theater space and all this stuff, people really got more vigilant about whether or not, you could sell tickets or if people were going to come see you, and they had to make sure you were worth, quote, taking a risk on. So it felt like kind of, especially once my tours got canceled and I never had a chance to really kind of launch out there.
Yeah.
It felt like starting back over, back to ground zero. Cause, right before COVID hit, I was doing feature and headliner work, and then COVID hit. And then it was like starting back over, where I was having to just like email people and send them video clips, like even like dry bar clips or whatever, and be like, can I do 5 minutes? Can I do 10 minutes? Like I literally had to start completely back over, which, was frustrating, but it was kind of like, well, what else are you going to do? So it was definitely hard, but I did the best I could with what I knew at the time.
Well, having that dry bar special is huge, though, as far as getting people willing to engage you. Like, okay, I'm going to seriously consider you because that, you have something.
Yes.
I think that I had the same, feeling when it ended. I felt relieved. I mean, you didn't want it to stop, but when you did stop, you realized you kind of needed to chill out for a little bit.
Yep. Totally.
And then after a while, you realize, okay, I don't know if you ever tried online com. Did you ever do any online stuff?
I did too. And just right or wrong, I just didn't like it. I hated it so much.
Yeah.
Because you can't hear the audience, like, not to be selfish, because I know like some of the people that I did it for like really enjoyed it, but like it was so hard for me to enjoy the experience because I very much feed off of the audience and off of their energy.
Yeah.
And, half the people are muted because, they're in their homes and there's sounds going on, and you don't want that background noise anyways, when you're trying to deliver material and people need to pay attention. But if they're muted, you also can't hear them laugh.
Yes.
So, doing online comedy is like, you say, it's like punchline, and then it's like, okay. And then it's like in your mind, you just kind of have to tell yourself, this is going great, even though it doesn't feel like it. I had to really I would keep it on the screen, where it shows everybody's, so not speaker view, but gallery view or whatever they call it. And I could at least see if people were going, like making the facial expression of laughter.
Exactly. Yes. And I did the same thing. I did it, probably, I don't know, 15, 20 times to try to supplement not being live, but, it just, after a while, it doesn't do it for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though the gallery's there and you can see expressions and people are having fun and so forth, but it doesn't do it. I mean, you got one person over here trying to figure out what's happening, another one's having chicken soup, another one over there is
one lady was like cleaning her bookshelf while I was talking, and like we're just looking at her backside while she's cleaning her bookshelf.
And then the dog wants to see what's going on.
Yes.
So it's but anyway, I love asking comedians that question because it was a difficult time. And as I told you before we came on live, I mean, the main reason I'm doing what I'm doing now was to try to fill in that gap. But I have a friend by the name of Donnie the Entertainer, Donnie Stokel.
Oh, yeah.
Are you familiar with Donnie?
Yes.
Donnie did a documentary, and he's talking with different platforms right now about actually getting it out there for the public. But I'm going to play a trailer from the doc. It's a great documentary. I'm going to play the trailer. It talks about comedy versus the cancel culture.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'm just going to play the trailer, and then I want to come back and then just get your thoughts about it.
Okay.
Cancel culture. We're talking about censorship in comedy. Do you think that cancel culture exists in comedy?
Basically, in a nutshell.
Definitely feel like, as bizarre as it sounds, like there's a war on jokes right now.
Cancel culture, it's such a misdirected umbrella term. You can't police what is subjective.
Oh, wow. Like, you kind of have to live your life bulletproof now. You just have to.
Greatest night in the history of television.
You can't say an inappropriate joke that doesn't have the right context.
There's always going to be some sliver of cancel culture, of woke, of political correctness.
You're not funny, and this is how you have to do the joke, because I know how funny jokes work. That's not the joke.
I don't believe people get canceled. I believe that they have a shift in their audience.
Put your hands together for Mr. Joe Rogan!
When people say somebody is canceled, I think it just means, oh, we found they did or said something that most people don't like.
I date a lot of bimbos. That's the problem, man.
So what?
So, let's think about that joke in today's culture.
Let's do
wow.
that. Let's
wow.
do that, Jay.
That's so good.
That documentary needs to be on a platform ASAP. It's awesome.
Yeah. Where do we watch it? I want to watch it.
Yeah, I got to get in contact with Donnie because he's been in contractual discussions for the past 3-4 months. So
good.
It's coming out. So I'd love to see that on net. That should be on Netflix.
It should be for sure. Yeah.
And
amazing.
Jeff Allen was in there and so forth. And of course, we saw the slap by Will Smith on Chris Rock, which was just polarizing. But you look at stand-up comedy and particularly in 2024, you got this cancel culture deal going on now, raising its ugly head. What is your opinion, JJ, of the perception of stand-up comedy in 2024?
I mean, it definitely feels like there's a tension around it. People are way more cautious, not only to laugh at something that could be potentially offensive, but it almost seems like people are ready and waiting for something to be offensive.
Right.
It's like they need a reason to justify their own personal anger.
Sure.
And so I think what makes comedy, quote unquote, hard in 2024 is people are so easily offended. And I was talking about this recently with a friend, and I truly believe that people who are so easily offended are people who have a lot of hurt that they haven't dealt with yet.
Yeah.
And that offensive thing triggers that hurt, and it gives them something to point at to blame the hurt on. But really, it's not actually that thing or that joke. They already had this hurt inside, and it's a lot easier to hate on somebody who's living in freedom and they're laughing about it.
Yeah.
Than it is to deal with the pain that you have, inside, or to work on yourself.
That is a great assessment.
Yeah, because I think laughter is healing. And I think when you can actually laugh at something that's hard or something that's tough, I think that's a sign that you have healed a lot. Like, I joke about some things in some of my shows that are very touchy subjects because I have my own personal history with things like depression and eating disorders. And I'm very quick to clarify, I don't make jokes about these things to make fun of the struggle or to make fun of anybody going through the struggle.
Yeah.
It's that I can laugh about it now because the struggle lost its power over me, and I don't have to hide it anymore.
That's right.
And so for me, I use comedy as a tool to address hard things so that those hard things don't keep me living in shame or in secrecy or hiding, what other people think. And so I think when people are so easily offended, to me, it says a lot about their inner world and maybe what they haven't dealt with yet. And finally, something out here, this joke, that whatever, that gives them something to point to say, that's what hurt my feelings. When really, I think it's probably actually deeper than that.
I totally agree with that, because I don't know why you would go to a comedy show and get mad.
Right. Yeah.
I don't get it.
Go.
I mean,
Go.
that part right there, I absolutely do not get. We're having a good time. And I was doing a show once and I saw this guy. He wanted to come up and kill me. I mean, this facial expression was, I'm going to get you. And I was,
Yeah.
everybody's having a pretty good time except him. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to focus on this guy. Everybody's having a good time. I'm just going to focus on them. I forgot he was there, but people come to the show. I agree with what you're saying. And there's something going on inside of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that they haven't resolved. They have a comedian friend by the name of Nikita B. I don't know if you've ever met her or not, but she's hilarious. And she said, I like what you said about eating disorders, for example. It's like, don't ever get on stage as a craftsman until you've worked through it. Like, you've got to reconcile that idea within yourself first.
Yep.
Right. And then you can just go out there and talk about it, and people will understand. Well, they should.
Hopefully.
I don't care how hard you try, JJ. There's always somebody that just doesn't understand. But
it's so true.
You can still produce it because you've worked through it.
Yes. Yeah.
You know? And it's helping somebody.
Totally. Well, and that's the thing. And that's even why, you know, I bother sharing stuff like that, not just because it's freeing for me, but me speaking it out makes it freeing for someone else who feels like they can't voice it or they're struggling alone. Like the amount of women or girls or whoever have come up to me after shows and was like, I needed to hear that, or I've struggled with that too, or just hearing you normalize rehab was so refreshing for me. Cause like one woman, she was like, you know, my husband's in rehab right now and it's been such a secret. It's felt so shameful. But the way that you talked about it up there just made it seem like so normal. And like, it's just a part of this process. And it's something that we'll get through. Like, it made me realize I don't have to hide it. It's just a season that he's in right now. And I'm like, totally. Like, I'm not making fun of rehab. I'm taking away the power that the stigma around rehab has by talking about it.
100%. 100%. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with JJ Barrows Newton on bogradio.fm and radioqdx.com out of Lucama, North Carolina, and KCHF TV in Albuquerque, New Mexico. What, in your opinion, JJ, is a fine line? Because it's comics, you know, we take jobs sometimes that may have been over our head. What's the depending on who you may be, but what is that fine line, JJ, between taking a gig to challenge yourself and taking a gig you're just not ready for?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer because it's interesting. I think early on I was fortunate enough to have a lot of great opportunities and success in some of those opportunities early on. And so I was given some opportunities that a lot of people, especially who were further into the comedy industry, kind of saw as she's not ready for those. And it really messed with my head. Like, you know, before that, I just kind of was like, I'm enjoying this process. Yay. Say yes. I learned say yes to everything, you know?
Right.
And, you know, it wasn't until I heard other voices that there was this opinion around you haven't earned that yet, or you're not ready for that yet. That really kind of messed with my head. And I think had I listened to them, I wouldn't have even have tried to do the ones that I did because I just would have assumed, oh, well, they've been doing this longer, so they know they must be right.
Yeah.
But I do think it's true. There absolutely can be things in life that maybe we quote aren't ready for. But as it pertains to like comedy, you know, I honestly don't know. I think if you get the offer, if someone specifically saw you perform and they liked that enough to say like, hey, we want to put you on whatever, or we want to have you come do this.
Yeah.
You know, I think if you're given that opportunity, like, I think it's worth trying. You know, even if worst case scenario, let's say it goes horrible and you bomb and it's not at all what you thought it would be.
Yeah.
You're probably going to get an epic story out of it that you're going to end up using as material later down the road. And so it's not a complete fail, I don't think. I think of it as more of a learning curve. I think of it as more of a lesson. I mean, every time I walk away from a show that was like hard to do or that was difficult, I'm like, well, I'm either like, well, that was boot camp. Like I just learned something new. It trained me in a different way, that I didn't know I needed to be trained. Or I'm like, well, I got new material out of that one.
Well,
because
yeah. Well,
there's material, and when things go bad, there's plenty of material when things go bad. When everything goes good, there's not a lot of funny stuff there. But when things go bad, there's a lot of funny stuff there.
Oh my goodness, there's so much comedy when things go bad. And again, getting back to what my comedy buddy Nikita B said about processing through it, like once you've resolved it and just said, you know what, yeah, I was really bad. That was really bad. And then you start looking at what was funny about it, as you go back and look at the horror. Like that's actually funny. And so I totally agree with that. I remember I did my first 45 minute. I'd never done probably more than 20, 25 minutes. And I got offered to do a 45-minute set. And I said, man, I'm going to challenge myself. I'm going to do it. And I went there. It was a show in Baltimore, and I had my wife sit in the front with these cue cards so that I could keep up with the jokes in order.
Yeah.
It's just like, that's another thing that you have to kind of like get past. Like, don't get caught up in your order. But anyway, I never even looked at her. I knew my routine so well that I didn't even know she was there with the cards. I was just rolling.
Yeah.
And did really good and all of that, did really well. But I think there's I wish I could remember this guy's name, but he made a great point. He said, you cannot cheat comedy. I think you kind of know within yourself if you're ready to at least take a bite at this thing. There's a process to comedy. Like you have to do your writing, you have to do your open mics, you have to do your showcases, you have to do comedy in places maybe you don't want to do or you're unfamiliar with. Yeah. Brian Regan said, you should do comedy in front of any demographic.
Yeah.
You should have so once you have kind of like paid your dues to comedy, you kind of know when you're ready for certain platforms. You just kind of know. If you kind of want to leapfrog over everything I just said and go to Vegas and do you're going to fall flat on your face. You should have known that. You got what you deserve. Matter of fact, I had a friend of mine that did just that. And it becomes mud. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you kind of know innately if you've paid your dues enough to take on certain challenges. For example, do you still do open mics?
I don't currently. I'm not opposed to them.
Yeah.
At all. I don't currently. But I've been fortunate enough to the shows that I do, I still have the same material that I use for those shows. Now that I'm back, I'm trying to write a whole new hour.
Okay.
And so now that I'm working on that, I'll probably dabble again. Not because I do not think I would not do it to gauge if the joke is good or not. I don't think open mics are good for that. I don't think that's the purpose of open mics because most of the people at an open mic are there to perform their own set.
Yeah.
So they're not there to listen to you. They're not even there to pay attention to you. They are in their own heads. They are not checked into what you're saying. So you could say something so funny and it's going to get maybe a And if you assume, I didn't get that many laughs at an open mic, it must not be funny. That's the worst assumption you can make because half the people there aren't even paying attention. You do the open mic just to say it out loud, just to get it out.
I love it.
To hear how it sounds, to feel how it felt to say it out loud. You can kind of gauge a little bit. Sure, if people were paying attention there or not, but like do not rely on an open mic audience to determine whether or not your material is good. That's not why you do it. You do it just to exercise the muscle of getting on stage and saying it out loud. And so some of the stuff I'm working on, I do want to hear how it feels. It's one thing to say it in your room and write it on paper.
Yeah.
But I want to get on stage and feel how it feels just to say that out loud as a quote part of a bit or, as part of a set. And so I'll probably dabble again once I have some of that down and I'm working in that arena. But yeah, more recently I haven't been doing them.
And I think that a lot of jokes that you say at open mics, you have to understand. Not only do you get people there that are not paying attention to you, they're in their own set, what they're going to do when they get up there. Everybody's there to work their stuff. and they don't care about what you're talking about, and they think they're funnier than you anyway. So why would I pay attention to you? I'm going to be a star. So you got that stuff you're facing, and it's like, okay, get it out, like you said, and then you just kind of realize if you can get a chuckle or two, which is really, disrespectful, but if you can get a chuckle or two, then you kind of, I probably have something. Then when you got to a real show, because people are dialed in a real show, JJ.
Yes.
They're dialed in and they're ready to have a good time.
Yep.
You find out the joke's really good.
Yep. Totally.
And so great point you make. It's like, don't just throw it out just because you didn't get what you thought you were going to get. You're there to work your stuff and get it out. And then you just kind of take off from there. We're talking with JJ Barrows Newton, everybody, on bogradio.fm. You're listening to the Maurice Brown Comedy Show. So are you comfortable? I mentioned this a moment ago. Are you comfortable performing in front of any demographic?
I don't think so, because I don't think I've performed in necessarily all of the demographic. I'm nervous before every show.
Okay.
So even though I know this material is great, I know it works, regardless of demographic, I mean, every audience is so different.
Yes.
It's like the ocean. One day it's calm, the next day it's raging. And so if you go out to the ocean and you think, oh, today I could swim laps and it's so easy. Look at me, I'm amazing. And the next day it's raging and it'll spit you out. Well, you're not going to go, well, I'm never going to swim again. It's just, no, it just was different. And so I find that with audiences, I mean, even here, like, there's a comedy club here in Chattanooga, and I've had some of my favorite shows there and I've had some of my worst shows there. And it's the same city, same location, but every audience is different because whether it's the time of night, whether it's the night of the show, a weekend show versus a week show, whether it's an older crowd, a younger crowd, whether it's and I know, I lived in California, so I did tons of comedy in California, doing comedy in California and doing comedy in the South. Two very different demographics.
Yeah.
Some stuff that lands in California really doesn't land in the South, and vice versa. Some stuff that really lands in the South doesn't land in California. And so I think having done so many different demographics, at least like geographically, I have a little bit of an idea of at least what works for me universally.
Yeah.
What's more region oriented versus what's more universal. But I would say it's still an area I need to work on. I would say it's still an area that I wouldn't say I'm fully comfortable going in front of any demographic and just doing, all my material. I would say I'm still figuring out what really works across the board.
Yeah.
For no matter what demographic I'm in, this is just funny to like humanity.
Well, I cut my comedy chops in Washington, D.C. I'm in Austin, Texas now. I've been here for about 2 years, but I've been in front of so many different demographics. I did a show once in the ghetto and killed. And then I went to the other side of D.C. to a young Caucasian Republican crowd,
wow,
25 to 30, with the same set. The funny thing about that, I didn't really care about the demographic being different.
Yeah.
One of the issues I ran into was some of the references in the material, like not only was it a different demographic, they were young. Like some of the jokes, there's no way. I'm 59, JJ.
Yeah.
So some of the black references I was making from Kool and the Gang and stuff like that, Grandmaster Flash, the Furious Five, they don't even know who they are.
They don't know. Yeah. Totally.
That was one of the issues. But I also got, upset with the promoter of the show before, and I was angry. I got angry. I was so angry with this guy. And then I got up there, when the mic, the cord falls out of the microphone. I mean, I'm like, bobbing. I'm like, hey, man, because I'm trying to figure out how to fix this. and I couldn't remember his name, and this girl in the audience said, "His name's David." I said, "Oh, thank you, David." Anyway, I digress. The thing about it is, JJ, Brian Regan, he said, I feel like, because he used to do a comedy when he was starting out, they had different crowds every night. He performed Monday through Saturday or Sunday in front of whoever came through the door. And there were certain nights when a certain demographic would come through. Some of the comedians would go, "That's not my crowd."
Oh, funny. Yeah.
Right. And they wouldn't perform.
Oh, wow.
And he said it happened. He saw that with a lot of comedians on certain nights. He said, "You're never going to make it like that."
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Brian Regan is hilarious.
He is very funny.
The guy, and so
He's
there's
done his
something
work.
to be said about that. You have to have a fearless mentality.
Yes.
And just take on, audiences that on the street you probably couldn't relate to.
Yeah.
I always like to say, one of the miracles of being a comedian is making a room full of people your best buddy.
Yeah.
For however long that's a miracle.
Totally. Absolutely.
And we do God's work as Christian comedians up there. That is an absolute miracle. There are people out there that I wouldn't have a conversation with in front of a Walmart. But now, tonight, we're going to have a ball. Yeah. JJ, speaking of that, is there a difference to you between Christian comedy and clean comedy?
Yes. I call it church comedy. I call it clean. So I think there's 4 different types of clean comedy, at least.
Okay.
I think there's clean comedy, there's church comedy, church clean comedy, there's family friendly clean comedy, and then there's dry bar clean comedy, which is its own realm of they have their own set of rules for clean comedy.
Yeah.
But essentially the different being like clean is essentially like, it's probably PG-13. It's like you're not going to get any hardcore swear words, you're not going to get any crass material, but you can kind of like toe the line and you can kind of be suggestive and you can kind of say stuff that would make people go, "Oh, I know what he was talking about,"
Yeah.
Church clean is more like you're more than likely you're performing in a church. So, not only it's probably more PG than PG-13. It's probably like, not only is the material clean, but maybe it's best not to be suggestive. Try not to say something like, "Oh my God." Like it's a little bit more strict than just clean comedy, right? Okay. So some of my stuff, I have stuff that's suggestive or stuff that totes the line. Okay. And depending on the type of church, it makes some people go like tighten up a little bit. So there's that. The family friendly comedy, I think that's harder than both of those because family-friendly comedy, not only can you're not going to swear, you're obviously not going to be suggestive or crass in any way, but you have to be aware that kids are present. So you can't even tell stories that might be like, Santa Claus isn't real, or, the day I found out that the Easter Bunny was my dad, or when my sister sat on my hamster and killed him. Like you can't talk about things that would probably make a kid cry, like finding out Santa's not real or a pet died.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Not family friendly. No.
Yeah. So that's its own realm. And then dry bar is just all of that on steroids.
My gosh. Amazing.
It was just like next level. So I definitely think there's a difference in all the different types of clean comedy. And, comedy is subjective, and so is clean comedy. Like, different people have different ideas of what they think clean is. And so, some people think Disney movies are bad, and some people are like, that's like the purest thing you could ever watch. So it's like, it's hard to gauge because everyone's opinion is so different. But I do think there's different levels of it for sure.
And I think the confusion sometimes with churches when you're talking about a Christian comedian, just because a person says that they're a clean comedian for your church, that person says they're a clean comedian, that doesn't mean they're fit for your church.
Yeah.
And, I used to do a clean open mic in Washington, D.C. and I had I'd say 95% success rate.
Yeah.
But I had one guy come up there, and he didn't cuss one time, and he didn't use one profane word, but it was filthy.
Yeah.
If you could imagine that, right? And my wife, she got this far from my nose, and she said, "Get him off right now." I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I went up there and I took the microphone and I just said, "Ladies and gentlemen, so and so," and get out. And I talked to him afterwards, and I said, "Dude, I told you this was a clean show." And the guy had he was from Eastern Europe, so he had a broken English accent, which is also very funny. And he said, "Yeah, but I don't cuss." I said, "Dude," I said, "Dude, but you were talking about some very gross things, man.
Yeah.
It's subject matter."
Totally.
And a church would go, and I'm just using this in a hypothetical sense, might see a person, and the person says they're clean and this, that, and the other, and they may not even see them perform and hire them, and then you got a horror show at your sanctuary.
Yeah.
And that's
I did. Yeah. Like I did a show with a guy, the show was slated as a clean show.
Yeah.
And he was totally clean. Like he didn't swear at all, but he was incredibly political, which I don't do political comedy at all. And political comedy can be very polarizing, right? Because we all have everyone has their own opinion. And especially in 2024, like it's just, I ain't touching that. But this guy was like, I mean, he was just laying in to a specific political party, and the people that were for that political party were loving it, but the people that were not were like, it was so divisive.
Yes, 100%
for the crowd, and there was such a tension in the room that even though it was clean, it was hard to like endure because it was almost cringy because it was like, ugh, it was like the way that he would even talk about the other party. It just was like, well, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it's like, just because there's no like swear words doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be this like squeaky clean, enjoyable experience.
Yeah. Well, it's there's so many experiences that you go through as a comedian on stage, a lot of things that you experience, advice you may get from a mentor or a fellow comedian. Something you saw go down with the comedian, whether it was good or horribly bad, bombings, hecklings, all those different things. For the time frame that you've been involved with stand-up, JJ, what's the biggest thing from your experience and all of those ideas I just gave out that's made you better at comedy?
Probably just saying yes to even shows that felt like difficult to say yes to, whether it's because I was intimidated or, maybe is she ready? Is she not ready thing. I think, you were talking about that example with Brian Regan saying the worst thing for those comedians to do or to say, I'm not going to do it. That's not my audience.
Yeah.
I think even though I might not feel fully comfortable yet, no matter who the audience is, it doesn't mean I'm not willing to try and find out, if my material works there or if I can actually like win them over, get them on my side. And so I think it's easy for me to want to kind of like back down and back out sometimes, especially, I mean, comedy is very male dominated and, guys can be very, they can be very territorial and aggressive, and it can be hard to maintain, my sense of self and like really stand up strong and show up and kind of be like, I belong here. But I think the more that I keep trying and the more that I just keep saying yes, even if the opportunity feels a little bit like, ooh, this is a big one, or even if it's not a big one, maybe it's just one that's kind of intimidating or whatever. It's like, I think it's worth trying. And I think you're right earlier when you said comedians know within themselves what they actually feel ready and capable of, like ready for, versus and what would be a challenge versus what would be like, this is nowhere near my wheelhouse right now. And I would love to recommend someone who would make this an enjoyable experience for
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely, JJ. Absolutely. As I was saying before, I had a friend of a friend who just went out to Vegas, a big show out there in Vegas, and took a headlining spot. Wasn't near ready for it.
Yeah.
And what's really bad, now you have a bad reputation. Your
Yeah.
name's mud in the industry. So you kind of know that, it's good to take challenges and chances, no question. But you have to know what's realistic too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the problems kind of settle in.
Yeah. For me, it's having safe people too, to like bounce that off of, like, because it's easy to listen to the outside voices that'll bring you down, but it doesn't mean that they're right. So then having safe people that you can go to, it's like, hey, I'm wrestling with this decision, or I have this opportunity, like you've seen me work however long, or what I'm capable of based on the shows I've done. What do you think? Sometimes it's internally, but then for me, it's also sometimes checking in with the people outside of me, because I all too often, and I'm not proud of it, but I all too often let those outside voices kind of tell me what I should or shouldn't be doing. When I would hear all the time, she's not ready, or, why did she get there? Whatever. I would think, oh, okay, I just need to not do these yet. But that wasn't the case for me, at least not in those instances. But I hesitated so much more because I heard all that, versus like having people in my life and people in my corner, other comedians, my husband, stuff like that, people who love me, but they also aren't necessarily just going to like, flatter me. They're going to tell me the truth. It's important for me to have people like that in my corner too, that I can kind of bounce that stuff off of.
Well, it's important to be yourself and tell your truth. That's what's important. And your dry bar special is exactly that to me. I'm like, okay, JJ is telling her truth up here, and it was funny. It was really funny. And the thing is, it's not about trying to relate to the people. It's about getting the people to relate to you, because everybody respects truth. I mean, I don't care where you're from and who you are. Truth is truth, and everybody respects that. And that's what you were doing in your special. And it's one of the funniest specials I've seen on Dry Bar. They've done them. There's a lot of good ones.
Thank you.
And that's what you have to do. I mean, that puts you in front of any demographic, any demographic, because you're like swimming in yourself. Can do nothing but respect that. I want to ask you this before we get out. It's been a great conversation. It almost makes me feel like doing a two-parter. But what advice can you leave with young people out there that are thinking about going for it, particularly Christian/clean comedians?
I mean, I would say one of two things. One is, just be true to yourself, be who you are. I see too many young comedians who want to do comedy, look up whoever it is they look up to, or they love their comedy, or that's who they want to be like. They try to emulate that and be like them, or they try to be some version 100%. Of them. And I think that's where half of the battle is with struggling with comfort on stage and stage presence. A lot of people are just trying too hard to be like someone else, or what they think a comedian is supposed to be like on stage, as opposed to just, being them. And I've seen plenty of I did a show one time with this kid who was just super kind and so nice. And he was so sweet off stage, and he was brand new to comedy. I think he'd only been doing it 3 months, and he gets up there and it was so filthy, but his tone and his mannerisms he was so sweet that it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing if that's your shtick and your style, and that you have a crowd for that. But even the audience, you could tell they felt uncomfortable. Like, why is this sweet boy talking like this? Like, it was like, if this boy only knew he did not have to talk like this, I think he could actually win the crowd over more, but he just didn't, I think, realize it at the time. And so especially, I never set out to do clean comedy. I never set out to be like, it's not like I'm a crusader for it by any means. that fit for me on stage. Like I just, it's like if my mom's going to watch my comedy, I'm not going to be dropping any F-bombs. Like, and it doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth anyways. I've dabbled in the whole like, oh yeah, I'm going to be more edgy and I'm going to try this crap. And it's not me. It didn't work. And so for me, what worked was just being myself. And that's just how it came out on stage. So I'd say, one, as much as you can, try to figure out who you are, what your voice sounds like, and use that on stage. And then 2, be okay being a big fish in a small pond. Like, too many people think as soon as they want to start comedy, they got to go to the comedy hub. They got to go to LA. They got to go to New York. They got to go to all these places. This is where it's all happening, right? But what happens is a lot of those people get there and it's so saturated with comedy that you're fighting for maybe 1 minute of stage time at an open mic. And it's like a lottery. Maybe your name gets drawn, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so you spend all this time living in the city that's the hub of comedy, but you're not actually performing because you're just trying to make it there so that you can say that you're an LA comic or that you're a New York comic. Like, I feel very fortunate that I started in San Diego because it's a much smaller hub and there's plenty of clubs and there's not as many comedians as, say, somewhere like LA. So very early on, I got a lot of actual stage time, like show stage time, like not open mics, like shows. And I got to actually perform over and over and over again for 5 to 8 minutes pretty early on, which is like a pretty big deal. And I think had I just, when I started, one of my friends was, a couple months out of the comedy class, he was like, I'm going to move to LA. And, a year in, he was like, how are you doing 8 minutes? I'm still trying to get 2 at an open mic. I'm like, it's because you're in LA.
that's another example of getting out of your zone.
Yeah.
Like, you're not ready to go to LA.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay. Like, let that be okay. And it's not worth giving up stage time just to say I do comedy in LA. When in reality, you do comedy in LA, like, maybe 1 minute a week.
No, you're 100% correct. I mean, I've got a couple of, but I've got a friend by the name of Kason Wilson, who's on the staff for the Jon Stewart show, and Martin Amini, who's I've worked with both those guys, but they decided one day they're going to move to LA, and both of them are blowing up. But those guys were like legit comedians on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all grinding and working. They put the time in.
Yeah.
And to go for it like that. And it worked out. And it didn't always work out for everybody, but it did work out for them. JJ, this has been a great convo. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, get her book, Kind of Funny. Stories by a full-time comedian with 4 part-time jobs. You got to read it. She's really funny.
Thank you.
And also, you can listen to this interview on Spotify. Look for the Maurice Brown Show on Spotify. And good morning, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us, JJ. Thank you we got to do another show because we didn't. I didn't get a chance to talk about everything I want to talk about. So let's do a part 2 down the road. And get back together and chop it up. I love talking comedy. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, talking with JJ Barrows Newton on the Maurice Brown Comedy Show. Good morning, everybody. And JJ, thank you once again for hanging out. May the peace of Christ be with you and your family. God bless you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Amen. Amen.